What's up, guys? This is Nick Whalen from RotoWire. The NBA trade deadline coming up on February 9th. I want to talk about a few players and teams that fantasy managers should be keeping an eye on as the deadline approaches. Bojan Bogdanović out in Detroit, probably the number one name who's been batted around really since the moment he signed with the Detroit Pistons. Did sign an extension shortly after coming to Detroit, but not really something that I view as much of an impetus when it comes to a trade. Doesn't really make sense to keep Bogdanović around with the rest of this roster. Obviously, the Pistons are a rebuilding team. The injury to Cade Cunningham set them back a little bit, and there's going to be plenty of interest around the league for a player like Bogdanović. Now, for fantasy purposes, he's been great so far. I would be looking to sell Bogdanović if I can before the deadline. No matter where he ends up, he's not going to be anywhere close to the number one option that he is with the Detroit Pistons right now. He probably slots in as maybe a third option at best, more likely a fourth or fifth option, could even be a bench player if he lands with a much better team. So I'd be looking to sell high on Bogdanović as the trade deadline approaches. Myles Turner of the Indiana Pacers. The Pacers have a major choice to make when it comes to Turner. They either need to trade him or they need to be confident that they can sign him to an extension next offseason. As of right now, all indications are that they do plan to sign him to that extension, but who knows what will happen over the next few weeks. If they do end up trading Myles Turner, it's no longer just the Lakers who are interested. I think plenty of teams will be sniffing around Myles Turner. A lot of teams looking to add value at the center position. I'm not too worried about Turner's fantasy value. Chances are he's not going to end up in a markedly worse situation. He's averaging under 30 minutes per game already for the fifth time in the last 6 seasons. So doesn't really have a whole lot lower to go. I mean, there's even a chance he could wind up somewhere where he's playing closer to 30 to 33 minutes per night. That would be huge. No matter what, the blocks are going to be there when it comes to Myles Turner. Real quickly on Buddy Hield, Myles Turner's teammate in Indiana. Starting to seem more and more unlikely that Buddy Hield is traded, but he's one of those guys who you can slot into pretty much any team in the league. He'll be just fine. He leads the NBA in made three-pointers as of January 20th. He has 22 more makes than anyone else in the league. John Collins, it feels like we're on year 4 in a row now of having this exact same discussion about John Collins. I think this is the year that John Collins actually does get traded, and I'm not sure where he ends up. I know Utah has been one of the teams that's been batted about the most, but I think whichever team ends up getting John Collins is getting a steal here. I remain convinced that he can get back on track both in real life and in fantasy. He's only 25 years old. He's been stuck in a pretty disadvantageous spot with the Atlanta Hawks. They've, of course, prioritized Trae Young. You got Onyeka Okongwu in there. You got Clint Capella, DeJounte Murray. It just feels like John Collins has kind of been marginalized when it comes to the future of that team. And it wasn't that long ago. We're going back to 2019-20. He put up 22, 10, and 1.5 blocks per game. Ever since then, it's been a slow decline. Now he's outside the top 65 in 9-cat value this season. If it's me, I'm looking to float some offers out for John Collins right now. I'm trying to get him before he's ultimately dealt. If he ends up in a place like Utah, he could be playing 33 to 35 minutes per night for that team and be in a much larger role. Jakob of the San Antonio Spurs, having another really solid year. Shot blocking down a little bit, but still providing almost 1.5 blocks per game to go with 12.5 points, 9.5 rebounds, and 3 assists. Free throw shooting, as we know, always going to drag down his fantasy value. He is playing fewer minutes of late. He's down closer to 26 minutes per game this season compared to closer to 30 last year. Even so, I think I'm looking to sell Jakob as the deadline approaches. I think there's a pretty good chance that he ends up with a good team, like, say, the Boston Celtics, who already have Al Horford, they have Robert Williams, they have Grant Williams, and that would be a situation where Poeltl is simply a luxury piece for the Celtics and could maybe play 20 to 25 minutes per night, which would obviously be disastrous for his fantasy value. So, again, the fact that he's already at 26 minutes per game, I think if he, there are a handful of spots where he could land and not really see much of a change. But to me, there's not really a situation where Jakob Poeltl gets an upgrade if he's dealt at the deadline. So he's someone I'm kind of mildly looking to sell at this point. All right, I want to talk about a few teams at large who are at a crossroads as the deadline approaches. And number one on that list has to be the Toronto Raptors. They're currently outside the play-in tournament zone in the Eastern Conference. I think at this point, everyone not named Scotty Barnes could potentially be on the table for the Toronto Raptors. That means OG Anunoby, Gary Trent, maybe even Pascal Siakam or Fred VanVleet. I think Anunoby and Trent for a variety of reasons. It's easier to trade those guys, but there's going to be interest in all four. And Toronto has shown us over the years, this is an organization that tends to be proactive with these situations. They're not just going to let this season play out and say, all right, get him next time. This is a team that if they have an opportunity to improve for the future, they will take it. So really hard to say, where any of those guys could land. I think for the most part, their value should be pretty insulated. But the one thing you have to keep in mind, especially with guys like Anunoby, Trent, Siakam, and Van Vliet, is they're in the number one most fantasy-friendly system in the league, playing for Nick Nurse. He's not afraid to play his guys 38 to 42 minutes every night. Doesn't matter if it's a back-to-back. Doesn't matter if it's the fifth game in 7 nights. He's going to do it anyway. So you have to keep in mind, if any of those four players end up being traded, there's a pretty decent chance that we see their nightly workload pulled back even 5 to 10%. The Utah Jazz, 6th in the Western Conference. They have a handful of players, should they choose to sell, who would be very appealing. We're talking Jordan Clarkson, Malik Beasley, Jared Vanderbilt, Mike Conley, Kelly Olynyk, the list goes on. I would consider selling high on Jordan Clarkson. He has been excellent this season as a scorer, as a three-point shooter, providing lower-end rebounds and assists as well. But he's playing 33 minutes per game. That is way up compared to the rest of his career. I mean, we're talking like 6-7 more minutes per game than what he's used to. If he ends up somewhere else, he's almost certainly going to see a decline in role, likely to come off the bench if he were to go to a better team. So one guy, if you're kind of trying to decide what to do with Jordan Clarkson, I'd maybe consider cashing that out right now. Mike Conley, going to fetch plenty of interest. I think there's a chance his value could decline a bit as well if he goes to a more veteran-laden team. Another player who could be coming off the bench, could be seeing 22 to 27 minutes per night. So not talking about a major drop-off with Mike Conley, but still someone whose value I'm a little worried about going forward. And then the last player for Utah, Kelly Olynyk. He's been hurt of late, so it's been a bit tough to gauge his value. But either way, even if he remains in Utah, the recent emergence of Walker Kessler really is going to complicate things for Kelly Olynyk down the stretch. He started every game in which he's been healthy for as of now, but I think that could change going forward. And he's one of the guys that, if Utah at some point does fall back, if they turn this over to more of a youth movement, I think Olynyk is among the players whose value could suffer. The Charlotte Hornets, they are the second worst team in the Eastern Conference. As of right now, they're in that bottom three in the Victor Wembanyama sweepstakes. Kelly Oubre, Mason Plumlee, perhaps Jalen McDaniels. Those are the names that we're keeping an eye on here, but really it's Plumlee and Oubre for me. It feels like Charlotte has been showcasing Mason Plumlee these last few weeks. He's playing a ton of minutes, and to his credit, he's playing well. But obviously this team is going nowhere. This latest LaMelo Ball injury, I think, kind of solidifies the fact that this will be a bottom 3 to bottom 5 team the rest of the way. But since December 14th, Mason Plumlee is averaging 14, 11, 3 assists, 71% from the field. He's one of those guys that if he goes somewhere else, he is very unlikely to still be playing 30 minutes a night. I think he could be a backup center in some other spots. Even if he's starting, those minutes are likely to come down. So as far as I'm concerned, he's a player I'm looking to sell as the deadline approaches. I'm also looking to sell high on Kelly Oubre. He's injured right now. It's going to be a little bit difficult if he doesn't play before the deadline for Charlotte to find the right deal. But Oubre was fantastic prior to that injury, filling in for LaMelo Ball, filling in for Gordon Hayward, who's always banged up. But if you're a team looking to add Kelly Oubre, you're looking to add bench scoring, maybe some supplementary scoring. If he starts every now and then, that's great. But he's not going to hang on to that same type of role that he had through the first half of the year with the Charlotte Hornets. He was averaging north of 20 points per game. That's just not going to be possible depending on where he lands. In all likelihood, you're looking at a contending type of team, looking to add some scoring off the bench. And, Kelly Oubre could still be a valuable lower end starting caliber option in some leagues. But compared to where he was before the injury, that's just not going to be realistic if he ends up being traded.